Development of a Success Mindset. This is the Waterstone Show with Josiah Davis, episode 6. I was in Thailand and I was meeting with people who had been persecuted. So we went to the hospital and there was a man from Myanmar who was recovering in a Thai hospital. And he had been shot in the face and then stabbed multiple times and left in a ditch for dead, and had somehow survived and was brought to this hospital and was recovering. We were meeting with him and getting his story and discovering about how his wife and children were carrying on the work in the village in Myanmar. They had a great relationship with all the people in Myanmar, and the Muslim neighbors, the Islamic neighbors really loved and respected this family because of all the kind and good works they did within the community. It was other Islamists from other parts of the country who would come in and attacked him to take out the work and persecuted him in that way. But he was spending his time learning a new language to further develop his ability to go back and do the work, and was really looking forward to recovering and going back, doing the work which his family was continuing to carry on even after he had been brutally attacked. And we heard his story. We also were meeting with a group of pastors that had come from Laos, and they had come across the border into Thailand because there was religious freedom in Thailand. And so we were all meeting, and there was a whole Bible study school for them to equip them and strengthen them to go back and to better serve their communities of faith in Laos. And so we all met for several days, and then we crossed the border together, well, separately, but we all crossed at the same time. And so we crossed over into Laos, and I remember learning that a few of the pastors had been arrested for the time we had spent together. So they had been discovered with material they had brought back with them, and they had been arrested as they crossed the border. And so it was like the reality of the hardship that these communities were facing was just really coming home to me. And we were going to continue to get stories and to meet and to understand these people. And I was at this, we go to this tourist spot, this magnificent waterfall. Now, Laos is astonishingly beautiful. There is high, steep mountains that are lush and green, and that we went to this waterfall, and I was standing beneath the waterfall looking up and became astounded by the scale of the abundance of the water. And I was just looking up into the height above me and the mist and the light and the water that poured forth, and I became captivated by the idea of abundance. The water just kept coming in mighty torrents. And this is like to think of all the water and the resource that flows the river and the power. And I was thinking this and just caught up in awe. And as I looked at the light and the mist from which it came, all of a sudden I realized that it stretched above it a whole nother tier. And it went up into an even greater height that I hadn't seen before. So it was like through the mist, I realized that the waterfall was even greater and even higher than I had first been amazed by. And it just seemed to go up into the sky. And I was just like so struck by this thought of abundance that flows from God, and resource and light and water and glory. And all of a sudden my reverie was interrupted by a scuffle as there was a meeting going on where there was stories that were being shared from inside of Laos to our team. And we were tourists, so my job was to play the part of a tourist and to go look at the waterfall and to just kind of like display to anybody that might be watching the tourist element of our travel while some of that information from the underground church was shared. But there was a man who was watching the group, and he watched for a time and then flicked his cigarette and walked quickly off. And that was enough to scare and to disperse us, and we had to quickly get in our vehicles and basically escape. I don't think that we were necessarily in danger, but the Laos pastors were. And the threat, I understood, was real. We had just seen those that we had been meeting with become arrested, and I had just been meeting with the the guy from Myanmar who had been shot and stabbed. So there was an animosity that was very present and real. The hardship was really brought home to me through their sufferings, through their story, and through the breakup of that moment. So on the one hand, there's the glory and the beauty and the abundance that flows from God. And on the other hand, there's the hardship and the persecution and the challenges and the scarcity, you might say, that is the reality of walking with God. And so this is, in a poetic sense, the Waterstone. There is an abundance that flows in water, and the water just can curve and change and adapt to all the hard rocks and realities that it faces. And that adaptable competence of water and the persistent power that can shape the rocks. If you go and look at a waterfall, the rocks are being shaped by the water. Even though they are so firm and so hard, the persistent power will overcome and will shape the rock. There's places at Hebron Rock Colony you go to, and it's even carved into and has found a way through the rock and found new paths. They're really beautiful to behold. And so there is this wonderful poetic mystery of the way the water and rock and the reality of wisdom and the marketplace. So I think of the market. There's a verse in Proverbs that says that wisdom cries out in the marketplace. And there's a few ways to think about that. And one of the ways that I like to think about this proverb is in the marketplace, we face the hard realities of life. We have to go to work. We have to make money. We have to deal with the scarcity of resource, of time, of talent, and we have to create value, and merit-based and quality matter. And the realities that push upon us in the marketplace, I think causes wisdom to cry out. It is necessary to navigate life with wisdom in the marketplace. It just brings it forth. It hones it through our encounter with, you might say, a kind of truth, the truths of the marketplace. So that wisdom is like a water that is moving through the hard realities of rock. And so Waterstone is a development in the high country that was established in the early 2000s. And that was at the time I was going to school. Now, at the time, I was working at the Peddler Steakhouse, and I had started as a dishwasher. I worked my way up to head chef, and I was making steaks and making a little bit of money. And I decided to go to ASU, and I moved back in with my parents and into their basement, had this job, was going to ASU, and I got the financial aid package for school, which included some grant and some loan money for tuition, as well as some room and board. But I did not have a car, and I moved into, and I was living, as I said, in my parents' basement, and I walked everywhere I was going, and so I had this money, which was above and beyond tuition. And it was no payment, no interest loan through the school. So I used it to buy into this new development. I remember going with a real estate agent and looking at different properties. And I was a sophomore in college, and we went to the Waterstone neighborhood, and we were standing looking at this beautiful pond, looking at this beautiful space. And he was like, "What's wrong with this location? Why is it priced this way?" And he was like, "I don't understand why it's priced this way." I said, "I'll buy it." So I bought it with my student loan money. And then I had this one payment, which was my land payment. So I would pay $300 a month for this land. I remember friends of mine would be like, "What are you doing, Josiah? You've got this land payment?" And I didn't even have a car. And I would just have to come up with $300 a month for this land payment. And the rest was basically deferred in the form of my student loans. And so I carried that through. And then many years later, when I was building my business and needed to build a house for my family, we were able to take the now paid off land and use it as the down payment for the construction loan for the house that we built in Waterstone. And so there was a wisdom in that decision, which I realized later in life. I actually didn't see how good of a decision that was at the time, but I saw the world a little differently than than most sophomores in college do, and made some decisions, kind of unique decisions, which led to the success of owning a piece of property outright, which I was able to build upon that success, a house in the high country, and how to navigate life in such a way as to be able to build a home, to start a business. These skills are so difficult and important and overwhelming, and how we navigate those is one of the things I wanted to accomplish through the Waterstone Show, was to share how to have a success mindset. What are the original name for the show? Well, was going to be Conquer Your Mountain. I've obviously spent a lot of time talking about this narrative journey, which is the way in which I think about meaning, purpose, and success. And however, the CYM YouTube channel and Conquer Your Mountain idea is really a platform for many things, including the development of businesses, academy, podcasts, Why Not Me, other projects that we're working on. And so it's a bit broader than just this podcast. So I wanted to narrow the name down, and I called it Wisdom in the Marketplace with Josiah Davis. And I started to think about a couple episodes, but I realized that sharing how to have success, how to have wisdom that cries out in the marketplace, how to develop your ideas, was too narrow of a focus for what I wanted to say. The way in which the great stories underlie and inform, and the way in which our journey through the marketplace can be tied into the great adventure of following God's voice, inspires me. And I want to share this to explore the larger ideas and to just share from my heart, from my home. So I wanted a name that gave a greater freedom. And there is, on the backside of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, there is a huge, great rock called the Split Rock of Moses. And I visited it this past fall when I was in Saudi Arabia, and this rock is like 2 or more stories tall. It's this huge, huge rock, and it has this huge split down the middle of it, and it sits on this hill in this very rocky wilderness. And from it, there is a creek bed that flows down into the valley below, a bit mysteriously, because it's not like a mountainside that would have a creek bed or a runoff from it. There's no water there. There's no spring there. So where would this creek bed have come from? So I took a picture of this rock, and that is the emblem for the Waterstone Show, because when Moses came in the wilderness place, he's in a hard, rocky place, and they have need of provision. And God tells him to strike the rock of Horeb. Now, when you're standing in this area, you realize there are rocks everywhere. And so when you just kind of read the story, it's like I've always imagined like him kind of hitting this little rock with a staff and like a stream that comes out of it. But it's a nation and their flocks needed water. And the rock of Horeb is not just one of the many rocks that are throughout the whole wilderness valley, but it is the one that stands above the others, stories tall. And it is this rock split and dramatically leaving a riverbed or a creek bed that would be seen thousands of years later in the topography as all the water flows into the valley. And standing in that place and imagining all these things, it's like, oh, a nation and 1 million people and their herds could have fed and drank here. So this idea of discovering provision in the wilderness in dramatic and amazing ways. In Moses' life, he strikes the rock with his stick, and the water comes out and miraculously feeds the people. And then later on, in Numbers, I think it's 20 or 22, there's the story of him striking the rock in the wilderness of Zin, and he does it in frustration. He strikes it twice in frustration at the people, and water comes out and feeds the people. So the action of the first, where he strikes the rock and the water comes out, and the action of the second, where he strikes the rock and the water comes out, is the same. And the result, the water comes out and the people are fed, is the same. And yet in the first one, God tells him, go strike the rock, and he obeys, and there's a provision. and it moves him and the nation forward in the purpose. And the second time, God tells him to speak to the rock. And he's frustrated and he does not honor God and he disobeys and he strikes it. And even though the action and the result is the same, the result is he does not enter the promised land. So it holds him back from the promised land. And there is in this mystery of a success mindset, discovering how to unlock a miracle. When you're in the wilderness place, you need provision, you need success, and you break forth and you get, needs to be rooted in meaning and purpose. The heart matters. Our heart matters. It will either move us forward into our purpose or it will hold us back from our promise, depending on our heart. So while, yes, we need to develop the skills to see the world, to be able to make a decision where you can, when I bought that property, it was such a good deal. Later on, the developer of the neighborhood came to me and he said, Josiah, I don't know why I marked that property so low. I marked it the same as the other lots, even though it sat next to 27 acres of common area and a beautiful pond and was so wonderful. I didn't price it up. I don't know why I didn't do that. You got such a great deal. I was just thinking about the big views on the top of the hill, and it all happened so fast. I was one of the first to buy in the neighborhood, which is why the realtor was like, what's going wrong with this property? And and so it was this amazing miracle, you might say. It was this open door, this people call it luck. I think it was a blessing, It was this thing that I walked into. So it was this provision. But what matters isn't that I was able to acquire a property and build a house. I mean, that's success, right? That's the water coming forth in the wilderness when you are not even with a car and walking around and you are able to position yourself and make decisions that lay a foundation. But what matters is the heart, the family time, my children's young years, that they grew up in this home and we spent all this time. And that specialness is the matters of the heart. That is the meaning and the purpose. So the success needs to serve the greater purpose. And that is what is really displayed in the Waterstone, the rock of Horeb, the split rock of Moses. Is yes, there is the need for provision, the wisdom that cries out in the marketplace, but it needs to be rooted in the heart matters. And that is understood in the great stories. So there is the mountains of Bethir, Shinir, Amana, these ideas, these poetic ideas and these stories that I discover in the scriptures and I discover wisdom in to run my businesses, but they are really rooted in the greater story of, in the scriptures, as it says in Ezekiel 28, the Mount of Eden and the Mount of Sinai and the Mount of Zion, where everything culminates. And so there is a much greater story of which our lives are a small part, and our heart finds meaning when we enter into the promise of the great and beautiful story. The house that is built finds meaning when it is rooted in the family home and the life that comes from that. And so our successes in life need to be rooted in meaning and purpose. And the way that we navigate all of that is through understanding wisdom and God's voice as it cries out in the marketplace. This is the Waterstone Show. That is where the name comes from. And as Waterstone is poetic, I will be journeying through all kinds of ideas in this show and sharing my philosophy and theology of success. Thank you for joining me for episode 6. I cannot wait to bring on our next guest in episode 7. So again, like, subscribe, comment, help build the podcast. And thank you so much for listening. This is the Waterstone Show.